All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Heather, and we're going to be talking about Google in this presentation. So let me start screen sharing with you, and then we can start talking about Google. So the presentation I'll be talking about, and I want to highlight a phrase, is critically using Google Ngram Viewer for language learning. Because hopefully if you came to this presentation, you're open to the idea of a new tool which you can use with your students. And this is really good. I'll talk about this in the presentation. I think this is good too for students who maybe don't have as good of an internet connection. Maybe COCA is not working out. But we want to talk about critically. So I'm not saying that Google is perfect. I know Google has a lot of problems, but we want to train our students to critically think about Google and how it can be used for language learning. And my name is Heather. I am an ESOL instructor, and I'm currently, most of the work I'm currently doing is at Baltimore City Community College. So why Google? Okay, one, it's easy to use. Despite Google's flaws, it is very user-friendly. It's familiar. Whether we like it or not. And I think if we had a room that we were all in and I had you do a show of hands, I'm pretty sure most of us have used Google today. Maybe not if today, this week. It's free. There's no membership. It's unlimited. I didn't put unlimited up here, but it's free, unlimited. It can be used as much as possible. Motivates. Students use Living Google because they know it. And it works well for students with lower literacy and technology skills. So in my current position, I'm working with a variety of students, but some of them come from backgrounds where, they're on a phone. The only way they can access Zoom is their phone. They might not even have an internet connection at home. And some of them don't have a lot of tech literacy. Teaching them how to use something with like COCA is extremely time consuming. And to be frank, is a lot of work and time that they don't need to spend if they don't have an internet connection that works. And of course, I love COCA. I'm not bashing COCA. Actually, I think COCA in many ways, because I'm sure some of you are asking, why Google? Why not just use COCA? COCA is an excellent tool. But I think we have to deal with the reality of the fact that there are many students who, for various reasons, now academic contexts are different. I think COCA is extremely useful, not just in academic context, but in many spaces. There are many students who might not have the technology to use something like COCA. And it's already used. Whether we like it or not, people are using Google every day. So we want to kind of train our students, like, how can you use Google in a constructive purpose? Talking about this, many confessions, and these confessions actually came from graduate writing students. When I was working at the University of Maryland, I taught a lot of academic writing courses, and maybe my students got too comfortable telling me the truth, but I had many graduate students that were like, Heather, we get it. This is an amazing tool, but we don't have the time. I mean, they would use it. I'm not saying they didn't use COCA. They did use it. But for every single assignment, they didn't realistically always have the time. And these are actual student comments. Please don't get angry at me. Don't send me an email like, hey, Heather, I think you're teaching terribly. These are students' comments, and I couldn't force them. I mean, I wanted them to use COCA, but if they're telling me I use it sometimes, but not all the time, they would say it's too time consuming and too much work. Not all, but there are students who would admit this. Another reason, which I think is just a reality that we have to swallow, it can be really tricky for students with limited technology, maybe limited tech literacy. Maybe they don't have good internet speeds. They can't see everything clearly on their phone. They just don't read or write well in the language to begin with. So it can be just, I'm not anti-COCA. I'm really not. I want you to know that. But I'm just saying that in some contexts, maybe COCA, it depends on the context if we use it or not. So a lot of this presentation, I actually got this idea from just the reality of teaching when I was seeing that many of my students were telling me they weren't using COCA. Not many, I shouldn't say many, wow, but there were quite a few who told me, they loved Coca, but they wanted to use Google for some purposes. So rather than tell them, you have to use Coca, end of conversation, I told them, okay, let's talk about Google. Let's talk about how we can use it in a constructive way. So I just wanted to give credit to this website here because some of the ideas in this presentation, I had the ideas, but I used this website to help me construct them. All right, so how can Google help with language learning? And this is actually adapted from a lesson I've given to students. You can look up vocabulary words, but also you can learn collocations. Of course, this would follow a lesson where you teach students what collocations are, and you can check your grammar. So one thing I might start out with, I usually use this after we'd already talked about collocations, is which is better, at the beginning of the book or in the beginning of the book? And I would say, let's go to Google, let's do a search, and let's try to figure it out. One thing you want to make sure to tell your students, though, is to put these quotation marks around the text, because if they don't do that, it won't work quite right. So just doing a Google search, hey, at the beginning of the book, quite a few results. You show them here how many results there are. In the beginning of the book, not so many. So we see from this example, and this is something a colleague of mine actually did in grad school. English was not her native language, but she often tried to use this. She said, hey, sometimes this works. So, when I first started teaching, I was like, okay, grad school colleague, I trust you. You're not a native speaker, you do this. But I did discover it doesn't always work. So we're going to talk about that, don't worry. So I might tell students, let's do this. Let's take some grammar, which is correct. Here's two examples here. Suggested him to see a doctor, suggested that he see a doctor. Go to google.com and check, see how many hits you get. And remind them, don't forget to use this around their text. So I would actually have them do this. In this case, I think Google will actually tell us the truth. So let's go to Google. Let me show you how to do this. So I tell students, let's play on our phones. Well, play on our phones, not play on our phones. Let's use our phone or our laptop in a group, one device. So you see here, suggested him, and these are actually mistakes. All of these are mistakes from my students' writing. This was something that someone wrote in their paper. So we see about 4,000 results. I might tell them too, like, look at the types of results, are these, what types of websites are these? Some of them are like Facebook, so maybe that's not the best. Or suggested that he see a doctor. So hey, it works, okay? Yay, okay. But did it work actually? Let's check. Did it work? Did it tell us what we need? Yes, it did. Okay, so in this case, suggested that he see a doctor. Google gave us the right tool, okay? It gave us the right information. So you might want to train students how to do a quick search. But then you might say, hey, okay, so it worked here. Well, let's talk about something else. Warning, Google is often unreliable. So you might ask them, okay, wait, we got the right result. What are you talking about, Heather? How is it unreliable? So one thing that we don't have time for in this presentation is I often do have students, and if you create a list, one application is you can read, a student's papers, you can make a list of common collocation or vocabulary errors, you can give them the other version, and have them do a worksheet where they go through maybe 10 or 15 examples, and you'll find at least one or two where Google gets it wrong. And after you do that activity, after you show them a list of collocation or vocabulary mistakes or whatever you want to do, you could have them look it up. And I'm sure that one or two groups will find a problem where Google gives you more hits for the wrong option. After you do that activity, you might talk about why. Like, why do you think we're getting some mistakes with Google? Why is it that Google works a lot of the time, but not always? Informal language, one. Okay, and I would elicit this from your students. Two, incorrect usage. So there's a lot of English out there on the internet. A lot of it's not proofread. Of course, in this presentation, I'm often training students for academic writing or professional writing, so they need to use the words in the correct way. But you might want to draw the point, this is not formal. This is maybe incorrect. Maybe it's not someone who knows English very well writing it. 3, unreliable sources. So blog posts, Facebook, social media. the people that are posting the information about English, do they have a degree? Do they really know how to use English properly? So have them think about this. And I always tell them, I know some of you are probably going to use Google. You're just going to use it no matter what I say. But if you use it, you need to be super careful. Proceed with caution. Triple check. Look at the sources it's coming from. Don't always trust Google. And then I might have students do this. So this is the activity I was talking about where they might not get the correct answers. Is if you give them a list of expressions and they put each of them through Google, I'm sure that depending on the time of day, one of them will get a wrong answer for one of these. And you might talk about, after doing that, you might talk about this why. Okay. So I usually tell them after going through all of it, like, here's how to use Google correctly. Here's how to look at hits. Here's how to figure out how to critically analyze it and talk about why it's limited. I try to sell them on this idea, okay, maybe we shouldn't be using regular Google. We love Google. It's really awesome, not for research, of course, but for finding some general information, like how to unclog your toilet, how to fix your sink. My husband and I bought a house a few months ago, so these are things I think about a lot. How to make your own patio, or whatever you're looking up. But it might be better to use a different tool. So what I'm going to talk about today is Ngram. So what is an Ngram? To keep it simple, we're not going to go into the research today. I just want to give you a teaching tool, keep it short. But it's words or characters that follow one another. So you have an example here from Google Ngram Viewer, which I'll be showing to you in just a few moments, where you put user experience, and you can see throughout history how common it is. Okay, and you'll see contemporary English, it's more frequent. So it's kind of like a corpus based off of Google Books. The database it uses is Google Books. You enter words or phrases to see frequency, how often they're used through the Google Books database. And one cool feature too is it does show frequency through time. So especially if you're working with students who are more advanced and they might find a word in the dictionary that they don't really understand how to use it properly, you can say, okay, let's look at the data. Let's look, maybe in 1800, this word was commonly used, or in 1950, but today it's not. Okay. So this is another student, actually, I should show you how to use this in just a second, but this is another mistake I saw in my students' papers. So my students had written, I think, some type of reflective paper for my course. I carefully analyzed the data. I found common errors, and one common error that was being made is high man. A lot of my students were writing high man. So I had them come up with, let's try to think of some other options. And one of them said, well, maybe another way you can say it is tall man. So I'm like, okay, let's look at the data. Let's see what's more frequent. So do we say high man or tall man? And this search was actually done about a year ago, but you'll see from the data here, tall man is more frequent. So I would tell them, okay, given this information, high man, you're right. It's not that it's never ever used, but it sounds a bit awkward. Most people say tall man. And then what I would have them do after is they would find more examples. So let me show you how to use this. And this is what I do with my students as well, is I sort of train them on how to use Google Ngram Viewer. And this can really be used at any level. I mean, just the vocabulary you use might change. I think the basic concept, maybe not with complete beginners, but the basic concept of looking at Google Ngram Viewer, even if they don't understand everything, what all the data means because of the language gap. I like how they just kind of put a funny thing here, is the same. So like tall man, high man. So basically what you do is you go to books.com/ books.google.com, my bad. books.google.com/Ngram Viewer. Okay. Ngrams. books.google.com/Ngrams. You delete this and you put the two words. You can actually do 3, 4, 5 or phrases you want. So like tall man, high man, and you press enter. Okay. And you'll see here, as I suspected, and you separate them with a comma. Oh, that's very important, because if you do this, actually, no, that doesn't work. You have to separate it with a comma. Otherwise it doesn't work. a cool thing too is you can actually change this if you want to do like 2000, because this just goes from the 1800s, but you can change it to 2000 to 2018. It's like they don't quite have it completely up to date. But you'll see here, of course, tall man is more frequent than high man. Okay. So what I have them do after I show my students how to use Ngram Viewer is I give them a list. This list is actually based off of student writing. They had written an assignment, and these were some mistakes like soils, pollutions. I chose some sets of words where one is the correct option, one is not. And I had them search on Ngram Viewer what's most common. So not to pick on British English, rucksack, I think it's British, I don't know, but sometimes I might have students write this word. I find it in the dictionary. So I say, hey, yeah, this is a word, but let's see if it's actually used. Okay, so they might see, okay. I'm like, okay, let's look up another word. Can you think of another word for this? So I might say backpack. Be like, okay, hey, yeah. So look, if you want to use the language, and of course, the goal of this course is American English. This is, you can do this for any country, but actually, I haven't gone into the data if this works using other varieties of English, but I should have started this presentation by saying this is for American English. I think you can actually change it here to British English and other languages, but I usually just keep it generally. But if you want to choose it, if you want to change it to American English, you can too, okay? But you see, it's more commonly. And I think because the internet is dominated by American English, for better or for worse, if you just put English, it'll probably be American English. Okay, so what I have them do, maybe I give them 20 minutes in a group, maybe 10 or 15, depending on their language level, is to do the same thing with A or B, C, D, and E, and F, and then we come back together and debrief. And for all of these examples, you'll actually see that Ngram Viewer gives you the correct option. But one thing I always do point out to my students, and I do in this lesson, some of you might be thinking, okay, yeah, this works in a lot of cases, but what if students don't really know the language? Like maybe if I say, what's another word for rucksack, they say backpack and they say bag. Well, if you look at this data here, of course, bag's going to be used more commonly because this is a more commonly used item. It's a more general term. So I always do in this lesson, it's kind of like my sneaky way of selling them on Coca. You might be a little bit confused because I'm talking about Google here. But I do always want to kind of draw their awareness to the fact that Ngram Viewer does have limitations. In many cases, if you can think of 2 or 3 options, it can help you find the one that's most common. But if you think about a phrase like turn on and turn around, let's actually see what's more common. We can see what's more common. This data can tell us what's more common. Turnaround is slightly more common. However, both are okay. You can say both, right? So they just have different meanings. So I do strongly encourage you to try this tool out, show them Ngram Viewer, show them how it can be used to see if they have 2 words with the same meaning or 2 phrases with the same meaning, or maybe a case where there's a count noun. They want to see if soil or soils is this a count noun. It works in many systems. I really do like this tool. I think it's simple. I think it's easy to use, but I think it should be carefully balanced. And you also want to point out to them, be very critical. Again, going back to the beginning of this presentation, I started it by saying critically. I italicized this to say critically using Google. We want to be really critical. Google can help us. Google is a great tool, but you want to be really careful if there's a case like turn on or turn around, to have students think about the fact that these are both valid meanings, follow up in the dictionary. Both can be said, but they just have a different meaning, right? So, I mean, Ngram Viewer is limited. I'm not going to ignore that reality. I think if you have 2 words that have slightly different meanings, like, bag and backpack, or 2 words or phrases that have, they're both used, but the meaning just changes depending on the context. You want to think about that, okay? And you could follow it up with a COCA search to tell them, let's use this actually as a way to see how it's used. Or you could even have them go to Google Books if they don't have the ability to access COCA for whatever reason. Maybe their phone just, it's overload. Maybe you have them put like turn on, and you say, okay, let's kind of look at the results in Google Books and try to analyze. I think you can find how they're used, right? I hope this all makes sense. As you can tell them, you know, assuming that they can't use COCA because maybe their phone freezes, or maybe you're just, it's not working, you might have them actually look at an example book and look for examples of how turn on is used. Okay. All right, good. All right, awesome. So I hope this presentation, let me give you an example before we wrap things up. So this is an application activity. I did do this with advanced graduate writing students at the University of Maryland in 2018. But I went through their homework. They wrote stories in class. I put in a box around any awkward vocabulary or collocations. And I had them use Google Ngram Viewer. If you want students to critically think about how Google does and doesn't work, you might have them look up to see in what cases does it work. So for anything circled or highlighted, you might have them say, first of all, you want to think of an alternate way to say this. So you said it this way, let's think of another way to say it. And then go to Ngram Viewer. Where does Ngram Viewer work? Where doesn't it work? After they do this activity, after they have some practice using Ngram Viewer, for this activity, I would say we're not going to use regular Google. We talked about how it doesn't always work. It often doesn't work. We're going to use Ngram Viewer. After they do the activity, maybe 20, 30 minutes, depending on the level, you want to have them come back together and talk about Ngram Viewer and how it can and can't be used. So it's kind of like training students. The purpose of this lesson is really to show them the tool, show them how Google can fail them, but also how it can be used in a critical, productive way. All right, so I hope you enjoyed this presentation. I hope it gave you a new tool that you can play around with. Hopefully it's useful. Actually, a lot of my students do like Ngram Viewer. They tell me it's really helped them out. And I think it's also showed them how to use Ngram Viewer alongside COCA. The idea here, I mean, I really want to give my students a toolbox. I want to give them the tools they need to succeed. And when it comes to technology, there's often different ways to do things. So I think when we talk about Quora, like COCA, which we all love, we also want to balance it with other resources that if they're under a time crunch, if they're dealing with a lot of external factors, and they just for technology reasons, I keep saying that because that's something I'm really dealing with a lot right now with the students I have, where they might not have the technology or the technical literacy, or maybe they just don't, I mean, realistically, they don't have the time to do a lot of COCA searches. This can be something that's used as a complement to COCA, not as an alternative. All right. So thank you again for coming. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Bye.